It happened in the late 1800s. They looked like they had just come in from the fields and then dressed in their country best. But here they were in Boston, Massachusetts, stepping off the train and walking somewhat timidly, without an appointment, into the outer office of the president of Harvard University. She wore an old-fashioned gingham dress, and he wore a homespun threadbare suit. The secretary took one look at them and immediately realized that such backwoods country hicks had no business being in this exalted and hallowed hall of learning. In fact, in her estimation, they really didn't deserve to even be in the city of Cambridge. The man spoke softly. "We'd like to see the president." The secretary snapped, "He'll be busy all day." The woman replied, "We'll wait." And they did. For hours, the secretary ignored them, hoping that they would finally become discouraged enough to go away. They didn't. She finally grew so frustrated that she decided to disturb her boss, even though it was a chore that she always regretted. After explaining the situation to him, she suggested, "Maybe if you see them for a few minutes, they'll leave." He sighed in exasperation and nodded. Someone of his importance really didn't have time to spend with people like them, and he detested gingham dresses and homespun suits because of the socioeconomic status that they demonstrated. After all, this was Harvard. The woman rather quietly and somewhat tearily told him, "We had a son who attended Harvard for 1 year. He loved the school and was very happy here. But about a year ago, he was accidentally killed. My husband and I would like to erect a monument to him somewhere here on campus." The president was neither touched nor sympathetic. Rather, he was shocked. "The nerve of these people. Madam," he said gruffly, "we cannot put up a statue to every person who attended Harvard and died. If we did, this place would look like a cemetery." She quickly responded, "Oh no, we don't want to erect a statue. We thought we would like to give a building in his memory." The president of Harvard rolled his eyes. He glanced at the gingham dress and the homespun suit and then exclaimed, "A building? Do you have any earthly idea how much a building costs? We have over $7.5 million in the buildings we have right here at Harvard now." For a moment, the woman was silent, and her husband said nothing. The president was pleased. It looked like he had gotten his point across, and maybe now he could get rid of them. The woman turned to her husband and observed, "Is that all it costs to begin a university? Why don't we just start our own?" The president's face wilted in confusion and bewilderment. Leland and Jane Stanford, he a tycoon, an industrialist, a politician, with considerable power and prestige, got up and walked away, traveling from Boston back to California, where in Palo Alto, and with about $40 million, worth about $1 billion in today's currency, they established the school that bears their name, Stanford University, a memorial to a son that Harvard no longer cared about. What's that old saying regarding judging a book by its covers? We do it all the time, don't we? Yes, even we Christians who proclaim that we are free of intolerance and prejudice, who swear that we accept all people as brothers and sisters, members of the same human family, who claim that we don't care about race and gender and status and wealth or any of those other qualities and characteristics that seem to divide people into groups and separate them from one another. We do it just like everyone else. I was really struck by something last January when 20 people died in France at the hands of Muslim terrorists who killed cartoonists who they believed had insulted the Prophet Muhammad, while another murdered several people in a kosher market simply because they were Jewish and he wished to make a statement. As with the O.J. Simpson story, the world watched in real time as the drama unfolded. All the news networks were there giving reports that had already been given dozens of times, their cameras trained on buildings where nothing could be seen because most of the time nothing new was happening. They told us over and over that they really didn't know any more than they had already reported, but that they would keep us updated with their breaking news. And when even they got bored with that, they switched back to previous film clips and rehashed what had already been presented over and over hours ago, multiple times. What an incredibly tragic story. All those innocent people killed, as well as eventually the terrorists who attacked them. The world mourned. People all over the planet in symbolic protest identified themselves with the magazine whose cartoonists were killed, thereby declaring that they would not be intimidated by such violence and bloodshed. In the following days, politicians from just about every foreign country had something to say in denouncing terrorism and went to France to participate in a 1 million person demonstration of solidarity. Did this all make a difference? Not that anyone would notice. But the politicians got on television. Terrorists were informed once again how angry and abhorred we all were by what they did. Countless speeches were made about freedom and how the victims will be forever remembered and how justice would be brought, sought, and achieved. And since then, we have gone back to killing one another. Everything I have just shared, while pertinent, I think, brings me to a main issue that the entire episode raised in my mind. Because you see, at the same time this was happening on January 3rd, almost 2,000 people were killed in Nigeria by Boko Haram. And at best, the report for several days was little more than a footnote that spiraled across the bottom of the television screen as events played out in France. To be sure, reports from Nigeria were slow to come in and were incomplete. But really, as my daughter so often declares, I'm just saying. My father and my grandparents were immigrants from Germany. They came to our melting pot of a country for a variety of reasons and made many efforts to become amalgamated into the total culture. But they still hung out with folks with similar backgrounds and experiences, language and traditions, in other words, other Germans. And there was nothing wrong with that. In fact, it was good. It enabled them to retain what was important to them in terms of their ethnic identities while still making a new life in a new place. For the most part, they did not look down on those whose backgrounds were different and who also hung out with people like themselves. After all, so many of them were also immigrants with similar goals and desires. They just came from other places. This country was built on immigration. All of our ancestors came from somewhere else. But throughout our history, those who are already here have to some extent resented those who have arrived later, even if they use them for their own purposes, especially if these newcomers did not come from the same place. Hence the persecution of the Irish and the Italian, the Chinese and the Japanese, the Jewish and the Muslim at various points in our national story. Every group identified its own scapegoats and did not treat them well. Black people have always been a primary target of bigots, one of the reasons being that they could not blend in as could those of Caucasian heritage. And this has also been true of others who remain identifiable even after the passage of several generations. Additionally, we have judged people as being inferior because of such characteristics as lesser wealth or education than our own, and those in charge are afraid they will be supplanted sooner or later by these others. Perhaps these are reasons why the president of Harvard denigrated the Stanfords. Because of their dress, he thought they were poor and therefore beneath his interest and concern. Perhaps these are reasons why our Western media went all out in its coverage of the terrorism in France and pretty much ignored what was happening in Nigeria. After all, that's what their audience responded to. Perhaps these are reasons why we're so eager to get rid of so many illegal immigrants, even though we use them and need them to do the jobs that we don't want to do, and even though we might be losing some brilliant minds that could change the future for the better. They are different, and there are a lot of them. Perhaps these are reasons why a 21-year-old white nut in South Carolina killed 9 black people at prayer in a church, people who had welcomed him into their midst. Our world is changing, and not always for the better. In some ways, we are becoming more open and accepting, especially as the world, because of vastly improved transportation and communication, becomes smaller and smaller. But in other ways, we are getting more insular and prejudiced, forgetting, despite in our case, our Christian proclamations regarding the brotherhood and sisterhood of all people, the universality of our humanity. Do I have answers for any of the problems we face? I do not. I can only point to what I think is happening and suggest that we each and all search our consciences to determine where we stand on such issues. And I want to end by returning to our scripture lessons of the morning. I shared with you the end of the story of Ruth. Let me touch on the beginning. Naomi and her family immigrated from Bethlehem to Moab to escape a famine. There her sons married local women, and with the passage of time, Naomi's husband and sons died. Homesick and hearing that the famine in Israel had ended, she wished to return. One of her daughters-in-law, Ruth, went with her. In Bethlehem, life for them was not easy, but they made it. And Ruth married well, a wealthy village leader. What's important to remember here is that the people of Israel and the people of Moab were traditional enemies. They hated each other. Yet Naomi and her family went to Moab when they were in trouble, and Ruth was accepted in Bethlehem when they returned. So what's so special about this? Ruth, this Moabite foreigner, was an ancestor of David, Israel's greatest king, and therefore also an ancestor of Jesus. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. When Jesus addressed his disciples, he also addressed us with the admonition as found in Mark, "Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear?" Certainly something to think about. Every month we set the table behind me as a communion table, and we invite those in attendance to participate in this particular ceremony.